Hi, this is Mary Fate. I'm the Executive Director for the National Foundation for Ectodermal Dysplasias. Welcome to our webinar series, and thank you for joining this webinar. In this webinar, you're going to be learning about the exciting X-linked HED research that is continuing by EspeRare. EspeRare is a not-for-profit organization, a Swiss company, that is dedicated to finding treatment and cures for rare disorders. The NFED is very proud of our contribution to this research. Actually, all of your contributions to bring this research to this point. All of you that participated in the many clinical trials and contributed to our research program. We have a lot to be proud of. So the NFED first funded Dr. John Zonana in 1986. He was one of the researchers responsible for identifying the gene causing X-linked HED. We also funded in 2004 Dr. Olivia Gade and Dr. Pascal Schneider. They identified the missing protein in X-linked HED and developed a synthetic protein that is used in these clinical studies. We funded Maggie Cassell and her work with X-linked HED dogs throughout the years. And in 2016, we funded Dr. Holmes Schneider so he could continue his work. In 2009 to 2015, we all collaborated with Ectodermal Pharmaceuticals to bring this research to the next step. So listen closely, stay tuned, and you're going to find out about groundbreaking, exciting X-linked HED research and the upcoming clinical trials. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions.
Hello, my name is Agnes.
My name is Caroline.
And we are both project leader at the EspeRare Foundation in Geneva, Switzerland, where we are in charge of the XLHED program. And we're very excited to be able to record this webinar for you, and very thankful to the NFED to give us the opportunity to talk about our plans. So, for this webinar, in a first stage, we will talk to you about the EspeRare Foundation, who we are and what we do. Then we will tell you a little bit about the history of the XLHED treatment, and in particular, we will focus on the most recent results, which are the antenatal results. And in the last stage, we will tell you about our plans for the upcoming clinical trial. So first of all, the EspeRare Foundation. So who are we? So we are a foundation, and our mission is to accelerate the development of drugs for children who suffer from rare and debilitating diseases. We are a drug development company, or we are a biotech company for sure, but there is a big difference because we are a not-for-profit. We are based in Geneva, in Switzerland, and we were established by 3 experienced pharma executives back in 2013. We're now a small handful of employees, but we work in close collaboration with an extensive network of experts. And these experts, we go and select them wherever they are the best in the world, depending on what expertise we require for each individual project. And of course, some of these experts that we're very keen on establishing relationship with are the patient groups. As a not-for-profit organization, we've raised over $12 million of philanthropic money to conduct some of the research activities we've done. We have a business model that is a bit unique, and this allows us as well to use private money to conduct some of the activities. And we can also establish partnership with pharmaceutical companies. And we do that because they have a different expertise to our own. And they're complementary to our expertise. And we need to do that occasionally when we need to take a project further into development in particular. And why do we do this? Why do we try to accelerate the development for children who have rare diseases? The reason is that drug development is a very expensive and it's a very risky business. The majority of the drug candidates that enter the clinical research stages, or research that is conducted in human beings, they don't get approved at all, and they don't get to make it as a medicine. Conducting research in humans is expensive, and conducting the research into the compounds or the potential treatments is also very expensive. When it comes to rare diseases, each rare disease only concerns a very small population by definition. And so big pharmas traditionally, they've neglected these areas because the upfront investment into the research to find the potential drug candidates and then into the clinical research to see if these candidates work, this investment is just as high, but then the return is not so high because, of course, only a few people will benefit from the treatment and will pay for the treatment. So our aim is to shift the paradigm a little bit, and we try to fast forward the development of therapies for children who have these rare diseases. We have our own not-for-profit model, and we believe this model allows us to develop these treatments in a fair way. The way we develop treatments is based on the unmet medical need as told by the patients and their physicians, and it's also on the worth of the science that sustains the development of the treatment. And we also strive to develop medicines that ultimately would be accessible to the communities we develop them for. So quite a program. Now, a little bit about the history of the XLHED treatment, because before we actually go into the history of the treatment, we think it's worthwhile to tell you a little bit about the mechanism of action and the science that underpins the way the treatment works. So what we need to start with is that the process of skin, gland, tooth, and hair development is highly controlled by the body. And is controlled both in terms of timing and in terms of location. This is all very important. In human beings, most of the groundwork that will lead to the development of sweat glands, hair, teeth, both primary teeth and baby teeth, it starts really early life in the embryo, and most often a few weeks after conception. And by the time we are born, this development is already into place. A very important player into this development is a protein called ectodysplasia that we know as EDA. So what happens is that during normal development, EDA acts as a messenger, and this is what's shown on this slide here. So it's a messenger, and it goes and transmits a message to a certain place at a certain time. And if this message is correctly transmitted, then you get the making of tissues such as sweat glands, hair, and teeth. And this starts to happen very early in embryonic life. In XLHED, this protein, EDA, is missing. It's either missing or it's not properly functioning. And that means that the message here doesn't get transmitted. And if the message doesn't get transmitted, all of the tissues, which are sweat glands, hair, teeth, and other tissues, they don't get developed properly or they don't get developed at all. So the idea behind the treatment, the potential treatments that we have in our hands, is fairly simple. We make a sort of man-made in a laboratory version of EDA, and we give it to XLHED patients. And it substitutes for the missing EDA. It transmits the signal in its place. And because the signal has been transmitted, you get the normal development of all of these structures, sweat glands, hair, teeth, etc. So it's a pretty simple concept, but the trick here, and this is a very important trick, is to be able to give this signal at the right time during development. And this is the difficult part. And this is because the different tissues start developing at different times and they also develop over a more or less long period of time. So the window at which they develop is very different depending on the tissues. And this is what has been learned by years and years of research, both in academic labs and also clinical and preclinical research. So the other thing that I'd like to say at this stage is that this mechanism of action is only valid for XLHED. So unfortunately, no other forms of ED will have this mechanism of action, and the treatment we are developing will only be ever applicable to XLHED. So now a little bit about the history of the treatment, a little bit of the timeline, because you may know or you may not know that this has been going on for a little while and there have been different partners involved. So the main events are here on this timeline. Initially, the protein, the treatment was first engineered in Switzerland by academic researchers with whom we are still in contact with and with whom we still work. And some of the funding that actually came to just uncover this potential treatment came from the NFED. This treatment was then developed by a pharmaceutical company called Edima Pharmaceutical, and they took over the development from 2009 to 2016. And within this time frame, they achieved really important milestones to do with drug development. First of all, they validated the efficacy in animal models. So they showed that the drug works as planned, and they also showed and studied the drug for its profile for undesirable side effects and safety. Once this had been achieved, they were able to start testing the experimental medicine in humans through a clinical study. So the first thing that they tested the drug for is safety. And this is the phase 1 study, which happened in 2012. And they involved 6 adults, XLHED, and they showed that in these adults, XLHED, the experimental medicine was well tolerated. So on the back of these important safety results, they were able to move on to a study to now see if, on top of being safe, the treatment would actually work. And the time frame which they selected to give the drug at was just after birth. So they treated newborn baby with this experimental treatment. The study took place over a few years, starting in 2013. But unfortunately, and while again the drug was shown to be well tolerated and with no serious side effects, there was no efficacy and there was no really strong benefit. And in particular, there was no correction of the sweating ability. So if we go back to the fact that development has to be given at the right time to be able to work, the study in newborn babies show that giving the drug post-birth was probably too late to correct any of the main XLHED issues. And following this setback, unfortunately, EspeRare had to close down. So after this, there was a sort of new milestone for the program. And in 2016, German physician, Professor Schneider, some of who you might have heard of him before, he was able to successfully treat 3 babies in Germany by injecting 2 pregnant women with the treatment. And we will get back to the results from this treatments because they are very important for the project. But just to say that this is in this context that EspeRare took over the project. So a project that had kind of known a failure with EspeRare and a project that had been sort of resurrected in an antenatal fashion. And the plan was to see if we could find a path forward and also if we can find the funding to do this. So let's go back now to the antenatal intervention. So after the failure of the EspeRare study in newborn babies, it seemed that the treatment needed to be given earlier than newborn babies. And Professor Schneider was able to successfully treat 3 babies by injecting 2 pregnant women with the treatment. This was not a controlled clinical study, like the 2 studies undertaken by EspeRare, but these were conducted in a special framework that allows a physician to treat a patient to try to give a better quality of life to this patient. And the results from this, where 2 mothers were treated at different times during the late pregnancy, are really very promising. So first of all, the sweat function. And there is all more normal sweating ability in the twins. And this is what's illustrated with the figure here. So some of you may have taken a sweat test with a macroduct system. So what happens is that the sweat is induced using a chemical, and then it's measured into the coil, and you can see it here as it goes blue. So what you can see is that the untreated brother of the twins that were treated does not produce any sweat. Normal children are here on the right-hand side, and they produce a normal amount of sweat, and the twins are somewhere in the middle. The graph underneath shows exactly the same thing. It's just a different representation. And the one I'd like you to really draw your attention to is this last graph here. Because in this last graph, what we can see is that the sweating ability that was achieved early on is maintained. So the last time point is when the twins were 3 years old, and they can still sweat as they could initially after the treatment. And this is really important because it goes well with the scientific rationale that once the structures are formed, they will function, and they will function, we hope, throughout life. So this is a really important feature, but there were some other benefits as well for these children who were treated in that way. Teeth in particular, they had 8 and 10 tooth germs in the twins, whereas their older brother only had 4. And more recently, when they were 3 years old, an X-ray was taken, and you could see that the first molars were present in both jaws. And this is really important because this will be important for not only feeding, but also being able to have dentures put properly in their mouth. So whilst we probably don't expect to have a full dentition, restoration of the full dentition, some quality and quantity improvement is what we're aiming for here. Eye health as well. The twins had large meibomian glands. These glands are glands which are found in the lower eyelid of the eyes, And they're very important because they produce an oily substance, and therefore they should stop the children from having issues with dry eye. Respiratory function as well was improved. The twins were not hospitalized for any respiratory issues, at least over the first few years of their lives. Salivation as well was much better. And this is again compared to their older brother, and this would help in feeding. And also, more importantly, we also follow these children to make sure there's no unwanted side effects from the drug. And we can report that these children are having a normal neurodevelopment. So this is all very good results indeed, very promising. And here are a few pictures for you from the twins and showing clearly that they can sweat. And so what we can say is that overall, after all those years of research, we think we have now found what is the optimal time to administer the experimental therapy for XLHED patients. And we also know from 2 clinical studies conducted by edema that the treatment appears to be well tolerated and to be safe so far. So what we need to do now, if we want to move towards an approved therapy, is to set up a proper clinical trial and try to repeat what Professor Schneider has done in a different context, within the context of a rigorous and robust clinical trial. And this is the plans that we've putting into place. And I'm going to talk to Caroline about this because she's the clinical leader on this aspect. So, Caroline, we're going to talk about the upcoming clinical study. And perhaps even before we go into the XLHED trial, can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of a clinical trial in general?
Sure. So, in order to be approved by health authorities, all experimental medicines have to go through a rigorous assessment process to determine if new drugs are safe, effective, and prescribed at the correct dosage.
Perfect. And so what about the specific XLHED clinical study? What's the aim of this study?
In our case, this study is pivotal, which means that the data package that is generated through this study, along with all the data that has been collected in previous studies, such as data from natural history studies that you or someone in your family may have participated in, will be submitted to the health authorities, such as the FDA in the USA and the EMA in Europe. And this submission of the dossier will lead to the approval of this medicine as an XLHED treatment. So it is a very important study. So ever since we picked up the project, EspeRare has been working hand in hand with the authorities, both in Europe and in the USA. These health authorities recognize that there is a large unmet medical need in XLHED, and they have granted to the program special status named PRIME in Europe and breakthrough designation therapy in US that allow a streamlined development and an accelerated review of the submitted dossier. This is in part why this study, if the results follow up, should be enough to get the medicine approved.
Okay, so there is something in a clinical study called eligibility, and that's to do with who can take part in a study. So can you tell us a little bit about who would be eligible for our XLHED pivotal study?
So we recognize that a lot of XLHED girls also have serious symptoms. The boys tend to have more consistent and similar symptoms that are typically also more severe. Therefore, this study will only enroll women pregnant with XLHED boys that as they have the best opportunity to see a benefit in receiving the treatment.
Perfect. And how many patients will be enrolled in this study, and how long will the study last?
So 15 to 20 patients will take part. The first time point at which we can check to understand if the treatment has worked is when the baby reached 6 months of age. So it is with this hopefully positive data that we will file the results and ask for a marketing authorization. However, the children will be followed up regularly, both to make sure that the treatment is safe in the long term, but also to carry on checking that it works properly. And this follow-up of the treated children will last until they are 5 years old. So it is very important that we keep track of all of the patients who participated in the study for the whole 5 years, as this data that we will collect over these years will secure the authorization of the medicine by the authorities, and will also ensure that there is enough data for reimbursement purposes.
Thank you, that's very clear. Now, what about the treatment itself and the administration of the treatment? Because we know it's an antenatal study, so it's a little bit different, perhaps, from most clinical studies. First of all, when will the treatment be given?
Okay, so in humans, most of the groundwork for developing full functional sweat glands, hairs, and teeth, both primary and adult, is starting in the womb and nearly completed at the time we are born. So we know from the result from the previous studies that the therapy does not work when it is administered to newborn babies. It is too late to correct. It will therefore also not work in children or adults. But we also know from the 3 boys treated by Professor Schneider before birth that this antenatal timing, before birth, is the right time to achieve a meaningful effect.
Perfect. So how will the treatment be given in practice?
So the treatment is a liquid solution that will be drawn into a syringe and injected into the amniotic fluid under ultrasound guidance in a procedure that is highly similar to an amniocentesis. Once injected into the amniotic fluid, the treatment gets diluted and the unborn baby swallows it. That is how we believe the treatment works. We are planning 3 injections during the 2nd and early 3rd trimester of pregnancy, week 25, 28, and 31 of pregnancy. Once these 3 injections have been done during pregnancy, we have no plans to continue injecting after birth for this study.
Okay, and last, how will the diagnosis be made?
Good point, because we need to make sure that male fetus is XLHED before we can treat. So one of the crucial pieces of information that we will need for the clinical study is genetic confirmation that the baby boy's mother is a carrier of XLHED. For the baby, if we already have a genetic diagnosis through an amniocentesis, that's good. We also have another means of obtaining a diagnosis for the fetus, and that is through a non-invasive scan that look at teeth buds. But before diagnosis of the unborn baby boy can take place, we will require that the pregnant woman have a genetic diagnosis for themselves. And that is something that can be done well ahead of the study.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit about the logistics of the trial? Where will the trial take place?
So the study will open first in Germany at the Professor Schneider Hospital. This is to de-risk the study, as the administration route of this medicine is new and relatively untested. But when the protocols developed by Professor Schneider's team are refined and other doctors and their teams have been trained, and once we confirm with the first few patients that the medicine works as planned and is well tolerated, we will then expand the study and open centers and treat patients in the rest of the world. That is to say, at least in a few other European countries and of course in USA.
Okay, and so this is, I imagine, a potentially challenging study because of the situation of the pregnant mother, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
So today there is no approved treatment given as an intra-amniotic injection. So this is very challenging on 2 counts. Because we are doing innovative medicine with a particularly vulnerable population that is a mother-to-be and her unborn child, and because there are no medicines given in that way that have been approved by any health authorities, so that we have to navigate unknowns together with the authorities. From the point of view of the patient, that is to say the pregnant woman, the clinical study will be challenging. First, there is a small window of opportunity to receive the treatment, as it is given 3 times and from pregnancy week 25 onwards, which is quite constraining but cannot be changed. Also, there is a short time between the time when the patient will register their interest to take part on the study, the screening, and the actual time when the study begins. But lastly, we all know that things can be challenging when pregnant. So there will be a support program available for the families. Travel and expenses incurred for the clinical trial visit will be reimbursed, and support will be given to families that are willing to travel to take part in this study. And of course, we might also have to deal with the challenge of the COVID situation, which will make things that little extra hard.
Perfect. So in terms of the outcomes, in terms of the potential benefits of the treatment, what is expected and how do we go about showing those benefits?
Mm-hmm. So the design of our study is based on the excellent results that you previously described on the twins. Our main objective is to restore the sweating ability. The study will be considered successful if we can achieve this consistently in treated subjects. The sweating ability will be tested in two ways: non-invasive sweat volume test and non-invasive sweat pore density count. And this test can be conducted reliably from 6 months of age, so that we need to wait until the babies are 6 months old to understand if the treatment has been successful or not. Obviously, we will also monitor some other potential benefits, such as eye health improvements, dry mouth improvements, that is to say better salivation, skin health, dentition, so more teeth, jaw development improvement. We also monitor the number of hospitalization for respiratory-linked infections and the number of reported hyperthermic episodes. On top of that, we also plan to assess the positive effect of the treatment on how patient and family feel and function in daily life. For this purpose, we are developing some questionnaires so as patients and their family could report directly about the status of their health condition without interpretation of the patient's response by a clinician or anyone else. For example, we will look at heat intolerance, medication use, respiratory symptoms, health-related quality of life, etc.
Okay, so any other potential benefits or things on the contrary that we don't think will be benefiting from the treatment?
Mm-hmm. So it is not expected that the treatment will correct all of the issues that affect XLHED patients. For instance, we know that there is no benefit expected on hair.
Okay. And so one last aspect of this clinical trial is always, safety first. So can you tell us a little bit about the safety and what we will look for in this study?
Mm-hmm. So in a clinical study, we always check to see if the drug is safe, well tolerated, and what are its side effects. We have a lot of data regarding safety and side effects from a number of studies conducted over the last decades in many research studies in research labs. There were no major safety concerns associated with the use of the drug candidate. More importantly, perhaps, we have data from the 2 clinical studies conducted by EspeRare and also the children treated in utero, and all are doing well so far. So in this study, of course, we plan to monitor the safety of the mother and the baby. We will perform a regular blood test and monitor the clinics and the vital signs. Also, we will have an independent data monitoring committee that will be in place in order to assess independently the safety of the subject in the study.
Okay, and perhaps one last important piece of information regarding this study: when we will know if the study is successful.
Mm-hmm. So we will need to wait until the last patient taking part in this study has reached 6 months of age to conduct the sweat test. Mm-hmm. Once we have all of these results, we can file the results with the health authorities. However, the study is not finished because we will follow up the children until they are 5. And this is to make sure that the treatment is safe in the long term and that the benefits are also sustained in the long term. And this is also to be able to assess other potential benefits such as teeth, quality of life, etc.
Thank you. I think that was a very good overview of the plans for the study. And we have one light slide for you, and this is really to show you how much your contribution has achieved. So this is a table, and all the sort of entries that are in white are natural history studies that XLHED patients, perhaps some of you might have taken part of. Some of them happened at NFED family conferences. In gray are the 2 clinical studies that XLHED patients have been brave enough to be involved in. And these studies together, they've generated data, and these data have been very important one way or another. Even the failed study in the newborn babies, they actually generated very precious data in showing that there are no serious side effects to the drugs. And all this data, we must remember, it's taken years and patience to collect all of this, and also lots of investment, financial investment. And all of this will be part of the package that will be submitted to the authorities after the next clinical phase. So thank you all for all of this data. But we still need you. And these are the 2 entries in orange. These are the upcoming pivotal clinical study that Caroline has just talked to you about. And then there's also the registry. And the registry is where we will gather a body of evidence to compare treated patients to untreated patients, and also to have other data that will be useful for later understanding exactly how good the benefits of the drugs are. So I think that's done for us now. Thank you very much, Caroline. And thank you all for your attention.